England, 1805. The soft patter of rain against the carriage windows had become a metronome to Lady Harriet Manners' thoughts as they travelled the familiar road to Hadnor House. She watched the lush English countryside roll by, her fingers nervously twisting the edges of her lace gloves, a habit her governess had tried and failed to break. The carriage jostled over a rut in the road, causing her companion to look up from her embroidery. "How you seem unusually pensive today, Harriet," Lady Georgiana Russell observed, her steady hand continuing to guide the needle through the delicate fabric. "Is it anticipation of seeing the Duke again after his months in London?" Harriet forced a smile. "I am merely tired from the journey, Georgiana. Nothing more." It was a lie, of course. Lady Georgiana, her dearest friend and confidant since their school days, knew it as well. But mercifully she did not press further. The truth lay buried beneath years of practiced composure. At 22 years of age, Harriet had spent nearly half her life harbouring feelings for Albert Hadnor, the Duke of Keswick, feelings that had never been reciprocated beyond fraternal affection. The son of her father's closest friend, Albert, had been a constant in her life, a brilliant star she orbited around, but could never reach. As the carriage crested the hill, Hadnor House came into view, a grand limestone manor nestled among ancient oak trees. Its familiar silhouette against the clouded sky caused Harriet's heart to quicken, despite her determination to remain unaffected. This summer visit was a tradition stretching back to her childhood, though this year felt different. This might be the last time she came here unattached, free to nurture her hopeless affections in private. The carriage rolled to a stop in the courtyard, where servants rushed to assist with luggage, and footmen opened the carriage door. Harriet accepted a hand down from the carriage, her eyes immediately drawn to the imposing figure striding across the gravel toward them. Albert Hadnor, the 8th Duke of Keswick, was everything a duke should be. Tall and broad-shouldered, with a commanding presence that demanded attention without effort. His chestnut hair, always slightly unruly, caught the breeze as he approached. At 29 he carried his title with the easy confidence of a man born to privilege, but tempered with the genuine warmth that had endeared him to both aristocracy and tenants alike. "Lady Russell, Lady Harriet," his voice carried across the courtyard as he bowed elegantly. "Welcome back to Hadnor House." When he straightened, his hazel eyes caught Harriet's, and his smile broadened in that familiar way that had always made her heart stutter in her chest. "Harry, you look well," he said, using the childhood nickname that only he was permitted to use. "London society hasn't changed you a bit." "Your Grace," Harriet curtsied, willing her voice to remain steady. "I dare say London had little opportunity to change me, as I spent most of the season avoiding it." Albert laughed, the sound achingly familiar. "Still hiding in corners at balls with your nose in a book, I presume?" "Not all of us find pleasure in idle gossip and dance cards," Harriet replied with a practiced lightness she didn't feel. "Come inside, both of you," Albert said, offering an arm to each lady. "Mother is beside herself with excitement at your arrival, and I believe your cousin, Lady Caroline, arrived yesterday." Harriet's step faltered. "Caroline is here." "Indeed. Quite unexpected, but Mother was delighted at the addition to our party. Of course Caroline would be here, beautiful, vivacious Caroline Bartlett, who had spent the London season capturing hearts with her golden curls and tinkling laugh. The same Caroline who had whispered to Harriet at their last encounter, "Albert pays me such particular attention, cousin. I dare say he might make an offer before summer's end." The grand entrance hall of Hadnor House welcomed them with its familiar splendour. Marble floors, ancestral portraits, and the scent of beeswax and fresh flowers. Harriet had once felt as comfortable here as in her own home, but now she felt like an interloper. "Harriet, darling," the Dowager Duchess of Keswick descended the main staircase with arms outstretched. Lady Eleanor Hadnor had been like a second mother to Harriet, especially after her own mother's passing 10 years prior. "How lovely you look," the Duchess said, embracing her warmly. "Though a touch pale. We must remedy that with country air and good food." "Thank you, Your Grace," Harriet replied, returning the embrace. "It is wonderful to see you again." The Dowager stepped back to assess her. "Still no husband on the horizon? Albert tells me the season was quite promising for eligible young ladies this year." "Mother," Albert admonished gently, "not everyone measures success by matrimonial conquest." "Of course not, dear, but—" "Harriet!" a melodious voice called from the top of the stairs. Caroline Bartlett descended with practiced grace, her golden curls arranged fashionably beneath a blue silk bonnet that perfectly matched her eyes. Her travelling dress was the latest London fashion, making Harriet's serviceable green muslin feel suddenly provincial. "Cousin, how delightful!" Caroline embraced Harriet with enthusiasm that didn't quite reach her eyes. "And Lady Russell, what a pleasant party we shall have." "Lady Caroline," Albert bowed slightly, "I was just telling your cousin how fortunate we are to have your company this summer." Caroline's smile was dazzling as she gazed up at the Duke. "Your hospitality is unmatched, Your Grace. I was just telling your mother how Hadner House puts even Barlow Court to shame." Harriet didn't miss the approving glance the Dowager cast toward Caroline. It was the same assessing look matchmaking mothers had been giving eligible young ladies in Albert's presence for years. "You must all be exhausted from your journey," the Dowager said. "Stevens will show you to your rooms, and we shall meet for tea in an hour." As they ascended the staircase, Harriet felt Albert's gaze on her back, but she didn't turn. She could not bear to see if he was watching her or Caroline. Later that evening, after changing into a dinner gown of deep blue silk, one of her few concessions to fashion, Harriet made her way to the music room where guests often gathered before dinner. She paused outside the partially open door, hearing voices within. "She's grown into quite the blue-stocking, hasn't she?" Caroline's voice carried clearly. "Who?" Albert's voice replied. "Why, my cousin Harriet, of course. Father says Lord Manners despairs of ever seeing her wed. Too opinionated, too serious, too unfeminine in her interests." "Harry has always had a sharp mind," Albert defended, though his tone was light, amused. "We've spent many an hour debating everything from politics to poetry." "How quaint," Caroline laughed. "Like a sister to you, I imagine. How comfortable to have such a relationship with a lady without the complications of romance." There was a pause before Albert replied, "Yes, exactly like a sister." Each word struck Harriet like a physical blow. She had heard similar sentiments before, but never so plainly stated, never from his own lips. Tears threatened, but she blinked them back furiously. 8 years of hopeless love crystallized into something harder, colder in that moment. Taking a deep breath, she pushed open the door with a smile fixed firmly in place. "Good evening." Albert turned, his expression brightening. "Harry, we were just discussing the possibility of a picnic tomorrow if the weather holds." "How lovely," Harriet replied, her voice steady despite the ache in her chest. "Though I fear my father's letter mentioned he may need me to return to Manners Hall earlier than planned." "Surely not," Albert frowned. "You've only just arrived." Caroline glided to Albert's side, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "Perhaps we could persuade Lord Manners to extend Harriet's stay, Your Grace. You have such influence." "I wouldn't dream of imposing," Harriet said quickly. "Besides, Father mentioned some matter of business that requires attention." Albert's frown deepened. "What business could possibly require you specifically, Harry? Surely you're father's steward." "Not all of us have the luxury of ignoring practical matters, Your Grace," Harriet interrupted, a rare edge to her voice. "Some of us must concern ourselves with more than pleasure and diversion." Surprise flashed across Albert's face at her tone. Before he could respond, the dinner bell rang, saving Harriet from further conversation. Throughout dinner, Harriet maintained her composure, laughing at appropriate moments and contributing to the conversation when required. But inside, something had shifted. The words, "like a sister," echoed with each beat of her heart. That night, as her lady's maid helped her prepare for bed, Harriet came to a decision. She would not spend another summer pining for a man who would never see her as more than a childhood friend. She would not torture herself watching Caroline or any other beauty capture his attention. She would free her heart from this prison of unrequited love, whatever it took. Little did she know that fate had plans of its own, plans that would soon turn her world upside down and force Albert to see her through entirely new eyes. The morning brought clear skies and the promise of summer warmth. Harriet rose early, her resolution from the previous night still firm in her mind. She dressed in a simple walking gown and slipped out of the house before most of the household had stirred, seeking solitude in the sprawling gardens of Hadner House. The rose garden had always been her favourite retreat. Lady Eleanor's pride and joy, it featured varieties from across England and beyond, arranged in concentric circles around a small stone fountain. Harriet settled on a bench, inhaling the sweet fragrance as she opened the letter she had received from her father just before departing for Hadner House. "My dearest daughter," I hope this letter finds you well. I write with news that may come as a surprise, but which I believe will secure your future happiness and prosperity. Lord Edmund Weatherby, Viscount Hollingsworth, has approached me with an offer for your hand in marriage. The Viscount is a gentleman of considerable fortune and impeccable lineage. At 35 he is established and respected throughout the North. While I would never force such a match upon you, I urge you to consider his offer with an open mind. The alliance would be advantageous to both families. Lord Weatherby intends to call upon us after your return from Hadner House. I ask only that you give him fair consideration. Your loving father, Lord William Manners. Harriet had read the letter a dozen times since receiving it, and each reading brought the same mixture of emotions: surprise, uncertainty, and a strange sense of possibility. Lord Weatherby was not unknown to her. They had been introduced at a dinner in London the previous autumn. He was serious, intelligent, and possessed a quiet dignity that had impressed her, though they had exchanged only brief pleasantries. Marriage had never been her primary ambition. Unlike most young ladies of her station, she had always valued her independence, her freedom to read and think and form her own opinions. But she was also practical enough to understand the realities of her position. An unmarried woman past the age of 25 became an object of pity, dependent on the charity of relatives. And now there was this new knowledge, that Albert truly saw her as nothing more than a sister. Perhaps it was time to put childish dreams aside and embrace a different future, one without the constant ache of unrequited love. "Making friends with the Roses again, Harry?" Harriet started at Albert's voice, hastily folding the letter and tucking it into her pocket. He stood on the gravel path, dressed for riding in a navy coat that accentuated his broad shoulders. His hair was tousled by the morning breeze, giving him a boyish appearance despite his years. "They make far better companions than most people," she replied, forcing lightness into her tone. "They are beautiful without vanity, and fragrant without effort." Albert laughed, dropping onto the bench beside her. "And they never interrupt your reading or challenge your opinions." "Precisely." His shoulder brushed against hers, a casual touch that once would have set her heart racing. Now she felt only the dull ache of resignation. "I apologize for Caroline's behavior last night," he said unexpectedly. "She can be thoughtless in her remarks." Harriet stiffened. "There is no need for apologies. Caroline speaks her mind, as do I. Still, her comments about you were unfair. Being intelligent is hardly a fault." "In a woman many consider it so," Harriet replied, "but it matters not. We cannot all be blessed with golden curls and empty heads." Albert frowned. "That's unkind, Harry. Caroline may be focused on frivolities, but she's not unintelligent." "Defending her already?" "She will be delighted to know she has made such an impression." A look of confusion crossed Albert's face. "What has gotten into you? You seem different." Harriet stood, brushing imaginary wrinkles from her skirt. "Perhaps I am different. People change, Albert. Even those you've known since childhood." She started to walk away, but Albert caught her hand, his touch sending an unwelcome surge of warmth through her. "Harry, wait. Have I offended you somehow?" For a moment Harriet was tempted to speak the truth, to lay bare the years of loving him in silence, the pain of watching him court other women, the final blow of hearing him confirm she was nothing more than a sister to him. But what purpose would it serve except to create awkwardness between them? "Of course not," she said instead. "I'm merely preoccupied with matters from home." Albert searched her face, clearly unconvinced. "Is it the business your father mentioned? Can I help?" "No," Harriet said firmly, withdrawing her hand from his. "This is something I must manage alone." Before he could respond, a voice called from the house. "Your Grace, Lady Harriet, breakfast awaits." Lady Eleanor stood on the terrace, waving them in. Beside her, Caroline was already dressed in a fashionable morning gown of pale yellow, her golden curls arranged perfectly beneath a lace cap. "Shall we?" Albert offered his arm, but Harriet pretended not to notice, walking ahead with brisk steps. Throughout breakfast, Caroline dominated the conversation with tales of London society and the latest gossip. The Dowager Duchess listened with apparent fascination, while Albert contributed occasional comments, his eyes frequently straying to Harriet, who remained unusually quiet. "I thought perhaps we might ride to the village this morning," Albert suggested, as the meal concluded. "The weather is perfect for it." "What a splendid idea!" Caroline clapped her hands. "I adore riding, though I confess I'm not as accomplished as I might wish." "Harriet is an excellent horsewoman," Albert said. "She could give you some guidance." "Oh," Caroline's smile faltered slightly. "How kind, but I wouldn't wish to impose." "It's no imposition," Harriet replied, surprising herself with the offer. "I would be happy to assist." An hour later, they set out from the stables. Albert on his magnificent black stallion Thunderer, Caroline on a gentle mare chosen specifically for her limited riding abilities, and Harriet on Artemis, a spirited chestnut she had ridden on numerous visits over the years. The countryside surrounding Hadnar House was among the most beautiful in England, with rolling hills, ancient woodlands, and meadows filled with wildflowers. Under different circumstances, Harriet would have revelled in the ride, in the freedom of galloping across open fields with the wind in her hair. Instead, she found herself positioned alongside Caroline, offering gentle corrections to her posture and grip on the reins, while Albert rode slightly ahead, occasionally glancing back with an approving smile that made Harriet's chest tighten. "You're so accomplished, Harriet," Caroline said as they approached the village. "It's such a pity that ladies with intellectual and practical talents are often overlooked in favor of those with more ornamental qualities." The barb beneath the compliment was thinly veiled, but Harriet merely smiled. "Indeed, though I find that men who value substance over appearance are generally worth waiting for." Caroline's blue eyes narrowed slightly. "How fortunate, then, that there are men for every preference. Some appreciate scholarly pursuits, while others, like the Duke perhaps, prefer more traditional feminine charms." Before Harriet could respond, Albert reined his horse to a stop, waiting for them to catch up. "The village looks busy today. Market day always brings people from the surrounding estates." Indeed, the small village of Keswick was bustling with activity. Market stalls lined the central green, selling everything from fresh produce to handmade lace. Villagers bowed or curtsied as Albert rode past, his position as their landlord and benefactor, earning him genuine respect rather than merely obligatory deference. They dismounted outside the village inn, where a stable boy rushed forward to take their horses. Albert assisted Caroline from her mare with careful hands, while Harriet dismounted independently, a lifetime of practice making her movements graceful despite her distracted thoughts. "Your Grace! What an unexpected pleasure!" A tall, distinguished gentleman approached, his riding clothes of excellent quality, though not ostentatious. He appeared to be in his mid-30s, with intelligent grey eyes and dark hair silvered slightly at the temples. "Lord Weatherby," Albert greeted him with a slight bow. "I didn't realize you were in the area." "I've recently leased Thornfield Manor for the summer," Lord Weatherby replied. "The northern climate becomes oppressive in July, and I've found Derbyshire quite agreeable." His gaze shifted to Harriet, and recognition flashed in his eyes. "Lady Harriet Manners, I believe. We were introduced at Lord Hartley's dinner last autumn." Harriet curtsied, studying the man who had offered for her hand without a proper courtship. "Indeed, my lord, what a surprise to encounter you here." "A pleasant one, I hope," he replied with a slight smile. His eyes were kind, she noticed, with laugh lines at the corners suggesting a good humor that wasn't immediately apparent in his serious demeanor. Albert cleared his throat. "Allow me to introduce Lady Caroline Bartlett, Lady Harriet's cousin." Lord Weatherby bowed politely to Caroline before returning his attention to Harriet. "I had intended to call upon your father next week. Perhaps this fortuitous meeting might allow me to become better acquainted with you before then." Albert's eyebrows rose. "You have business with Lord Manners?" A faint flush coloured Harriet's cheeks as Lord Weatherby replied, "Of a sort, yes." Caroline, ever observant, glanced between Harriet and Lord Weatherby with sudden interest. "How intriguing! Perhaps Lord Weatherby would care to join us for dinner at Hadnar House this evening. I'm certain the Duchess would welcome another guest." "An excellent suggestion," Albert said, though his tone lacked enthusiasm. "If Lord Weatherby has no other engagements." "I would be honoured," Lord Weatherby replied, his gaze still on Harriet. "If Lady Harriet has no objection." Put on the spot, Harriet could hardly refuse without appearing rude. "None whatsoever," she said, meeting his eyes directly. "I look forward to becoming better acquainted." Something flickered across Albert's face. Confusion, perhaps, or suspicion, but he quickly masked it with a polite smile. "Excellent. Shall we say 7 o'clock?" As they parted ways, Harriet felt Albert's questioning gaze on her back, but she deliberately engaged Caroline in conversation, avoiding the inevitable interrogation. She had no desire to explain her father's letter or Lord Wetherby's interest. Let Albert wonder for once, as she had wondered countless times watching him flirt with beautiful women at balls and dinner parties. That evening, Harriet took unusual care with her appearance, selecting a gown of deep crimson silk that her father had insisted she purchase in London. With its empire waist and modest neckline trimmed with delicate lace, it was fashionable without being ostentatious, elegant rather than showy. She instructed her maid to arrange her dark brown hair in a simple but becoming style, with a few soft curls framing her face. When she descended the main staircase, she found Albert waiting alone in the entrance hall, handsomely dressed in evening attire. He looked up at her approach, and for a moment he seemed startled, as though seeing her for the first time. "Harry," he said, his voice oddly constrained, "you look different." Harriet raised an eyebrow. "Different good, or different concerning?" "Good," he said quickly. "Very good. I've just never seen you in that gown before." "It's new," she replied. "Father insisted I make some concessions to fashion during the season." Albert nodded, still studying her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. "It suits you. Red. It brings out that is, it complements your complexion." An awkward silence fell between them, unusual for two people who had known each other since childhood and who typically conversed with easy familiarity. "Harry," Albert began, his tone serious. "This Lord Wetherby, how well do you know him?" Harriet met his gaze directly. "About as well as you knew Lady Elizabeth Montague before courting her last season, I imagine." Albert frowned. "That was different." "How so?" That is, Lady Elizabeth was introduced by my mother's dearest friend. Her family was thoroughly vetted." Harriet smiled thinly. "And my father is incapable of vetting potential suitors." "Suitors?" Albert's eyes widened. "Is that what Wetherby is? A suitor?" Before Harriet could respond, the Dowager Duchess entered with Caroline and Lady Georgiana, effectively ending their private conversation. "Harriet, what a lovely gown," Lady Eleanor remarked. "I've always said crimson suits your colouring. Doesn't she look beautiful, Albert?" "Indeed," Albert murmured, though his expression remained troubled. Caroline, dressed in a fashionable gown of pale blue that highlighted her fair colouring, assessed Harriet with new eyes. "Cousin, you've been hiding your sense of style, though I've always said confidence is the most becoming accessory a woman can wear." The sound of carriage wheels on gravel announced Lord Wetherby's arrival. When he entered the drawing-room a few minutes later, Harriet was struck again by his quiet dignity. He was not traditionally handsome like Albert, whose features had a classical perfection, but there was strength in his face and intelligence in his eyes that she found appealing. "Lady Harriet," he bowed over her hand, "you look enchanting this evening." "Thank you, my lord," she replied, noticing Albert's frown deepen from the corner of her eye. Throughout dinner, Lord Wetherby proved himself an excellent conversationalist, knowledgeable on topics ranging from agricultural innovations to literature. He spoke directly and without pretense, his northern accent becoming more pronounced when he discussed his estates in Yorkshire with genuine passion. "You've implemented crop rotation on all your lands?" Albert asked, genuinely interested despite his obvious reservations about the man. "Indeed," Lord Wetherby nodded. "The results have been most satisfactory. Yields have increased nearly 30% over the past 3 years. Lord Wetherby is considered something of an agricultural pioneer in Yorkshire," Harriet added. "Father spoke of your methods just last month, my lord." "Your father is too kind," Lord Wetherby replied. "I merely apply scientific principles to farming, as any sensible landowner should." "Not all landowners are sensible," the Dowager Duchess remarked with a pointed glance at her son. "Some prefer London society to the important work of managing their estates." Albert's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, taking a long sip of wine instead. Caroline, sensing tension, swiftly changed the subject. "Lord Wetherby, I understand you're a widower. How tragic to lose your wife so young." "Yes," he replied, a flicker of genuine grief crossing his features. "Anne passed 5 years ago. Childbirth fever. We had been married just 3 years." "How awful," Caroline murmured, though her tone suggested more curiosity than sympathy. "And the child?" "My daughter, Elizabeth, thrives," he said, his expression softening. "She remains in Yorkshire with her nurse and governess. At 5 years old she is already quite the horsewoman." "You must miss her terribly," Harriet said quietly. Lord Wetherby met her eyes. "I do. Which is why I do not intend to remain in Derbyshire beyond the summer. My primary residence will always be in Yorkshire, close to my daughter and my responsibilities." The comment was clearly directed at Harriet, an honest declaration of his circumstances and expectations. She appreciated his frankness, so different from the flowery, often insincere compliments typically offered in London drawing rooms. After dinner, when the gentlemen had rejoined the ladies in the drawing room, Lord Wetherby requested a few moments of private conversation with Harriet. With the dowagers smiling approval, they stepped onto the terrace, remaining within sight of the drawing-room windows, but beyond earshot. "I hope you'll forgive my directness, Lady Harriet," he began, "but our chance meeting today seemed providential. I had intended to approach your father formally before seeking an audience with you, but circumstances have allowed us to become acquainted without such formalities." "You refer to your offer of marriage," Harriet said, equally direct. Lord Wetherby nodded, a glimmer of admiration in his eyes at her forthrightness. "I do. I first noticed you at Lord Hartley's dinner, not for your beauty, though you are indeed beautiful, but for your intelligence and wit. You spoke passionately about educational reform for tenant farmers' children, a cause close to my own heart." Harriet remembered the conversation well. Most of the dinner guests had looked either bored or scandalized by her opinions, but one gentleman across the table had listened attentively. "Since then I have made inquiries about your character and family," he continued. "Everything I learned confirmed my initial impression, that you are a woman of substance and principle. When I learned from mutual acquaintances that you remained unmarried despite several seasons, I dared to hope you might consider an offer from a northern viscount with a young daughter and unfashionable interests in agriculture and education." His honesty was refreshing, and Harriet found herself genuinely touched by his proposal. "Lord Wetherby, I am honoured by your regard, but we are virtual strangers. How can you be certain I would suit your life in Yorkshire?" "I cannot be certain," he admitted. "No more than anyone can be certain of such things. But I believe in building a marriage on mutual respect and shared values, rather than fleeting passion. The rest, I hope, would follow naturally." From the drawing-room, Harriet could feel Albert's gaze boring into her back. A day ago, the knowledge that he was watching her with another man would have filled her with conflicting emotions. Now she felt only a quiet determination to move forward with her life. "I cannot give you an answer tonight," she told Lord Wetherby, "but I promise to consider your offer seriously before you call upon my father next week." Lord Wetherby bowed. "That is all I ask. And may I say, Lady Harriet, that regardless of your decision, I have thoroughly enjoyed our conversation this evening." When they returned to the drawing-room, Harriet felt a curious sense of peace. For the first time in years, she had glimpsed a future not defined by her feelings for Albert, a future with purpose and respect, if not romantic love. It was not what she had dreamed of as a girl, but perhaps it was what she needed as a woman. Albert, however, looked anything but peaceful. His posture was rigid, his conversation stilted as he watched Harriet and Lord Wetherby with increasingly obvious displeasure. When the evening finally concluded, and Lord Wetherby took his leave with a promise to ride with them the following day, Albert's composure finally broke. "Harry, a word," he said tersely, catching her arm as she prepared to ascend the stairs to her bedchamber. "It's late, Albert," she replied, deliberately using his given name rather than his title, a privilege of their long friendship. "Can it not wait until morning?" "No," he said firmly, guiding her to the small study off the main hall. Once inside, he closed the door and faced her, his expression troubled. "What game are you playing with Wetherby?" Harriet stiffened. "Game? I assure you, I'm playing no games." "Then what was that scene on the terrace? The private conversation? The lingering looks? You barely know the man." "I am becoming acquainted with him," Harriet replied coolly, "as one does when considering a gentleman's suit." Albert stared at her in disbelief. "Considering his—" "Surely you cannot be serious. Wetherby is nearly 15 years your senior, a northerner with provincial ideas, a widower with a child, all of which I am perfectly aware," Harriet interrupted, "and none of which I find objectionable." "But you don't love him." The words hung between them, charged with an emotion Albert himself didn't seem to understand. "How would you know whom I love, Albert?" Harriet asked quietly. "You've never bothered to ask." She moved toward the door, but he stepped into her path, his expression now genuinely concerned, rather than merely disapproving. "Harry, please, if this is about financial security or escaping your father's house, there must be better options. I could speak to Mother about finding a more suitable match." "A more suitable match," Harriet echoed, indignation flaring. "By whose standards? Yours? The Tun's? Lord Wetherby is a gentleman of means and character, with estates, a title, and most importantly, respect for my mind and opinions. What more suitable match could there be?" "Someone who loves you," Albert said, his voice dropping. "Someone who knows you, truly knows you, someone who—" "Someone like a brother?" Harriet interrupted, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. Albert flinched as if struck. "What?" "Nothing." Harriet shook her head. "It's late and I'm tired. Good night, Your Grace." This time when she moved toward the door, he didn't stop her, but as she reached for the handle, his voice, oddly uncertain, reached her. "Harry, are you truly considering marrying him?" Harriet paused, her back still to Albert. "Yes," she said simply. "I am." Without waiting for his response, she left the room, closing the door firmly behind her. It wasn't until she reached the sanctuary of her bedchamber that she allowed the tears to fall, not for love lost, but for a decision made. She would accept Lord Wetherby's offer. It was time to build a life beyond the shadow of unrequited love. The next 2 weeks passed in a flurry of activity at Hadner House. What had begun as a quiet country gathering expanded as additional guests arrived, friends of the Duchess, neighbouring gentry, and even a few of Albert's London companions who had decided the country air might provide a welcome respite from city life. True to his word, Lord Wetherby called almost daily, joining their riding parties, picnics, and evening gatherings. He proved to be an attentive companion to Harriet, engaging her in conversations about books and ideas, listening to her opinions with genuine interest, and sharing his own thoughts without condescension. If his manner lacked the passionate intensity of romantic love, it offered instead a steady, respectful appreciation that Harriet found increasingly comfortable. Caroline, initially dismissive of Lord Wetherby as provincial and dull, changed her tune when she discovered the extent of his fortune and holdings. "I had no idea he was quite so wealthy," she confided to Harriet one afternoon as they prepared for a garden party. "Yorkshire may be unfashionable, but 50,000 a year makes even the most remote estate appealing." "I'm not interested in his fortune," Harriet replied, selecting a bonnet that would shield her face from the sun. "Of course not," Caroline smiled indulgently. "But it certainly doesn't hurt his case, does it? And you must admit, cousin, it's unlikely you'll receive a better offer at your age." The barb stung, but Harriet refused to show it. "Lord Wetherby's offer is based on mutual respect and shared interests. His fortune is irrelevant to my consideration." Caroline laughed lightly. "How refreshingly unworldly you are, Harriet, though I notice you don't deny considering his offer." "And if I am," Harriet challenged. "Then I would say you're wiser than I gave you credit for," Caroline replied. "Though the poor Duke seems quite distressed by the prospect. He's been positively brooding since Lord Wetherby began calling." Harriet had indeed noticed Albert's darkening mood as the days passed. He watched her interactions with Lord Wetherby with ill-concealed disapproval, finding reasons to interrupt their conversations and monopolizing her attention whenever possible. It was as if her potential engagement had awakened some previously dormant possessiveness in him. Not romantic jealousy, she tried to convince herself, but the protective instinct of a lifelong friend. The garden party that afternoon was held on the sprawling south lawn of Hadner House, with white tents erected to provide shade, tables laden with refreshments, and a small ensemble playing gentle melodies. The weather was perfect. Warm sunshine tempered by a light breeze, the gardens in full bloom creating a riot of colour and fragrance. Harriet, dressed in a gown of pale green muslin with a matching Spencer jacket, found herself the centre of more attention than she was accustomed to receiving. Lord Wetherby remained attentive as always, but several other gentlemen also sought her company, seemingly noticing for the first time that Lady Harriet Manners possessed both beauty and charm when she chose to display them. "You appear to have developed quite a following," Lady Georgiana remarked as they helped themselves to lemonade. I count no fewer than 3 gentlemen watching your every move." Harriet glanced around discreetly. Lord Wetherby was engaged in conversation with an elderly neighbour, but his gaze periodically sought her out. A young baronet she had been introduced to the previous day was hovering nearby, clearly waiting for an opportunity to approach. And Albert. Albert stood with Caroline and several others beneath a large oak tree, but his attention was not on the animated conversation around him. Instead, his eyes were fixed on Harriet, with an intensity that made her pulse quicken despite herself. "3 indeed," Harriet murmured, "though only one matters." "Lord Wetherby, I presume?" Georgiana asked, following her gaze. "He seems a good man, Harry. Steadfast, sincere." "Yes," Harriet agreed. "He is all those things." "But?" Georgiana prompted gently. Harriet sighed. "There is no but. He is everything a sensible woman should want in a husband. And yet your eyes keep straying to the Duke." "Habit," Harriet said firmly. "Nothing more." Before Georgiana could respond, the young baronet finally gathered his courage and approached, requesting Harriet's company for a stroll through the rose garden. She accepted, partly to escape Georgiana's too perceptive gaze, and partly to prove to herself and to Albert that she was moving forward with her life. Sir Edward Blackwell was pleasant enough, handsome in a conventional way, and clearly eager to make a good impression. As they walked among the roses, he complimented her appearance, inquired about her interests, and shared amusing anecdotes from his recent travels to Italy. Under different circumstances, Harriet might have found him charming, but her thoughts remained divided between Lord Wetherby's steady presence and Albert's burning gaze. When they returned to the main gathering, Albert immediately detached himself from his group and intercepted them, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Sir Edward, I believe Lady Caroline was just asking after you. Something about your mutual acquaintances in Florence." It was a transparent dismissal, but Sir Edward was too well-bred to object. With a bow to Harriet and a promise to continue their conversation later, he departed in search of Caroline. "That was hardly necessary," Harriet said once they were alone. "Sir Edward was perfectly pleasant company." "He's a fortune hunter with gambling debts," Albert replied curtly. "Not the sort of man you should encourage." "I wasn't aware I needed your approval for my conversational partners." Albert's jaw tightened. "As your host and friend, I feel some responsibility for your welfare." "Friend?" Harriet raised an eyebrow. "Is that what we are, Albert? Friends?" "Of course we're friends," he said, sounding genuinely confused. "We've always been friends." "No." Harriet shook her head. "We've never truly been friends. Friends confide in each other, share their deepest thoughts and feelings. When was the last time you told me anything of real significance? When was the last time you asked about my hopes or fears or dreams?" Albert stared at her, taken aback by her sudden candor. "Harry, what's gotten into you? Of course I care about your hopes and dreams." "Then why have you never asked about them?" she challenged. "Why, in all our years of acquaintance, have you never once wondered what I might want beyond the safe, comfortable role of your childhood companion?" I assumed," Albert floundered, genuinely at a loss. "Precisely," Harriet said quietly. "You assumed, everyone assumes." Poor plain Harriet, content with her books and her quiet life, grateful for any scraps of attention. "Well, perhaps I want more than assumptions, Albert. Perhaps I want someone who sees me, truly sees me, as a woman with desires and ambitions of my own." Before he could respond, Lord Wetherby approached, his expression concerned. "Lady Harriet, forgive the interruption, but you seem distressed. Is everything all right?" "Perfectly all right, my lord," Harriet replied, forcing a smile. "His Grace and I were just discussing the nature of friendship." "A complex topic," Lord Wetherby observed, glancing between them. "If I'm intruding—" "Not at all," Albert said stiffly. "In fact, I believe the Duchess requires my attention. If you'll excuse me." He stalked away, shoulders rigid with tension. Harriet watched him go, a familiar ache in her chest, despite her determination to move past her feelings for him. "He cares for you deeply," Lord Wetherby said quietly. Harriet turned to him in surprise. "I beg your pardon." "The Duke," Lord Wetherby clarified. "He cares for you far more than either of you seem to realize." "You're mistaken," Harriet said quickly. "Albert sees me as a sister, nothing more." Lord Wetherby studied her face. "Is that what he told you?" "In so many words, yes." "And is that how you see him?" "As a brother." The directness of the question caught Harriet off guard. She had expected many things from Lord Wetherby, but not this uncomfortable perceptiveness. "My feelings for the Duke are complicated," she admitted finally, "but irrelevant. He has made his view of me quite clear." Lord Wetherby nodded thoughtfully. "Lady Harriet, may I speak plainly? I would expect nothing less from you, my lord. When I offered for your hand, I did so with sincere admiration for your character and mind," he said. "I believe we could build a satisfactory life together, based on mutual respect and shared values, but I have no desire to be any woman's consolation prize." Harriet flushed. "My lord, He held up a hand. "Please allow me to finish. I came to Derbyshire seeking a wife, yes, but also a mother for Elizabeth, and a partner in managing my estates. I want a marriage of equals, Lady Harriet. That requires honesty between us, from the very beginning." "I have been honest with you," Harriet insisted, "about everything except your feelings for the Duke," Lord Wetherby said gently. "I'm not offended, Lady Harriet. These matters of the heart are rarely simple. But before you accept or decline my offer, I would ask you to be honest with yourself about what and whom you truly want." Harriet stood silent, unable to deny the truth of his words. Lord Wetherby had seen through her carefully constructed facade to the heart of her dilemma. She was considering marrying one man while still in love with another. "I don't wish to cause you distress," Lord Wetherby continued. "Take whatever time you need to reflect. My offer stands, and my respect for you remains unchanged regardless of your decision." With a bow, he excused himself, leaving Harriet alone with thoughts that had never been more chaotic. She had believed herself ready to accept his proposal, to build a life based on respect and companionship, rather than romantic love. Now she wasn't sure of anything. That evening, dinner was a stilted affair. Albert was uncharacteristically quiet, responding to conversation with monosyllables and barely touching his food. Caroline attempted to fill the silence with cheerful chatter, but even her seemingly inexhaustible supply of gossip eventually faltered in the face of the palpable tension. After dinner, when the ladies withdrew to the drawing-room, the Dowager Duchess cornered Harriet near the pianoforte. "My dear," she said quietly, "I couldn't help but notice some awkwardness between you and Albert today. Is everything all right?" "Merely a difference of opinion, Your Grace," Harriet replied, unwilling to elaborate. The Dowager studied her face. "Harriet, I've known you since you were in leading strings. You've been like a daughter to me, especially after your dear mother's passing. If something troubles you, I hope you know you can confide in me." The genuine concern in Lady Eleanor's eyes nearly broke Harriet's composure. How could she possibly explain that she had spent years loving a man who saw her only as a sister, that she was now considering marrying another man to escape the pain of unrequited love, that Albert's sudden possessiveness was threatening to unravel all her carefully laid plans? "It's nothing serious," Harriet managed to smile. "Albert disapproves of my acquaintance with Lord Wetherby, that's all." "Ah," the Dowager nodded, understanding dawning in her eyes. "And do you care for Lord Wetherby, my dear?" "I respect him greatly," Harriet said carefully. "That wasn't my question," Lady Eleanor pointed out gently. "Do you care for him? Could you grow to love him as a wife should love her husband?" It was the same question Harriet had been asking herself since Lord Wetherby's proposal. Could respect and admiration develop into love over time? Or would she forever compare any man to Albert, finding them all wanting? "I don't know," she admitted finally. "I believe I could be content as Lord Wetherby's wife. He is kind, intelligent, and values me for my mind rather than merely my family connections or appearance." "Content," the Dowager repeated thoughtfully. "A modest ambition for a lifetime commitment. Not everyone can marry for love, Your Grace." "Perhaps not," Lady Eleanor conceded, "but those who have the opportunity should not squander it." Before Harriet could respond, the gentleman joined them, ending their private conversation. Albert immediately gravitated to Caroline's side, engaging her in animated conversation while pointedly avoiding Harriet's gaze. The message was clear. Two could play at this game of indifference. The following day brought rain, confining the household to indoor activities. Harriet spent the morning in the library, seeking solace in books as she had so often throughout her life. The vast collection had always been one of her favorite aspects of Hadner House, with volumes ranging from ancient Greek philosophy to the latest scientific treatises. She was deeply engrossed in a volume of poetry when the library door opened and Albert entered, stopping short when he saw her curled in the window seat. "Forgive me," he said stiffly. "I didn't realize the room was occupied." "It's your house," Harriet replied, closing her book. "I can leave if you prefer." "No," Albert sighed, his shoulders slumping slightly. "Don't go. In fact, I owe you an apology." Harriet raised an eyebrow. "For?" "My behavior yesterday," he admitted, approaching the window seat but maintaining a cautious distance. "I was possessive and intrusive. You were right to call me out on it." The admission surprised her. Albert rarely acknowledged fault, not out of arrogance but because he typically acted with careful consideration. "Thank you," she said simply. A silence fell between them, filled with the soft patter of rain against the windows and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. "Harry," Albert finally broke the silence, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "What did you mean yesterday? About us never truly being friends?" Harriet sighed, setting her book aside completely. "I meant that friendship requires equality, Albert. It requires seeing the other person for who they truly are, not who you want them to be or who you've always assumed them to be." "And I don't see you?" he asked, genuine confusion in his voice. "No," she said softly. "You never have." Albert moved closer, taking a seat on the opposite end of the window seat. "Then help me see, Harry. Tell me what I've missed all these years." It was an invitation she had longed for, yet now that it was offered, Harriet found herself hesitating. What good would it do to bare her soul now, when she had already decided to accept Lord Wetherby's proposal? Would it not be kinder to let Albert continue in blissful ignorance of her feelings? But Lord Wetherby's words echoed in her mind. "Before you accept or decline my offer, I would ask you to be honest with yourself about what, and whom, you truly want." "Do you remember when we were children?" she began slowly. "And you taught me to climb the old oak tree by the lake? I was terrified of heights, but you promised you wouldn't let me fall." Albert smiled slightly at the memory. "You made it all the way to the highest branch. Even though your hands were shaking so badly, I thought you might lose your grip." "I wasn't afraid of falling," Harriet admitted. "I was afraid of disappointing you. Even then, at 10 years old, your good opinion meant everything to me." Albert's smile faded, replaced by a thoughtful expression as he began to understand the direction of her confession. "As we grew older," she continued, "that desire to please you, to be worthy of your attention, only grew stronger. When other girls were practicing the pianoforte and embroidery to attract suitable husbands, I was reading philosophy and political treatises because those were the topics you found interesting." "I never asked you to change yourself for me," Albert said quietly. "No," Harriet acknowledged. "You never had to. I changed willingly, shaped myself to be the perfect companion for you, intelligent enough to engage in meaningful conversation, but never threatening. Present when you wanted company, invisible when you didn't. The perfect friend, the perfect sister." The last word hung between them, charged with all the hurt and disappointment she had carried for years. "Harry?" Albert began, but she shook her head, unwilling to be interrupted now that she had found the courage to speak. "I loved you," she said simply. "Not as a sister loves a brother, but as a woman loves a man. I have loved you since I was 16 years old, Albert. Through every season, through every flirtation and courtship you conducted with other women, through every casual touch and careless endearment that meant nothing to you and everything to me." Albert stared at her, shock evident in his features. "I never knew," he whispered. "Harry, I swear I never realized—" "Of course you didn't," Harriet said without bitterness. "Why would you? I was always just Harry, your childhood friend, the girl who could discuss politics and poetry, but wasn't really a woman in your eyes. Like a sister," you said. Those words broke something in me, Albert. "When did I say that?" he asked, his voice strained. "When did I ever call you a sister?" "To Carolyn in the music room the night I arrived," Harriet replied. "You didn't know I was listening, but I heard every word. She said I was like a sister to you, and you agreed." Understanding dawned in Albert's eyes. "That's why you've been different since then. Cold, distant. I decided it was time to stop living in a fantasy," Harriet said. "Time to accept that you would never see me as anything more than a comfortable fixture in your life. When Lord Wetherby proposed, it seemed like a chance to build a different kind of life. A life where I might be valued for who I am, not merely tolerated as an old family friend. Tolerated, Albert echoed, genuine hurt in his voice. Is that what you think, that I merely tolerate you? What else should I think? Harriet challenged. In all these years, have you ever given me reason to believe I mean more to you than any other family connection? Albert stood abruptly, pacing the length of the library with agitated steps. When he finally turned back to her, his expression was a complex mixture of emotions she couldn't fully interpret. You're wrong, he said firmly. So wrong that I hardly know where to begin correcting you. But perhaps it's best to start with this. I never agreed with Caroline, not in the way you think. I heard you, Harriet insisted. She said I was like a sister to you, and you said yes, exactly like a sister. Because I was uncomfortable, Albert exclaimed. Because the alternative was admitting that my feelings for you have never been brotherly, that they've been shifting and changing for years in ways that confused and alarmed me precisely because of our long history. Harriet stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. What are you saying? Albert ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration she had seen countless times over the years. I'm saying that I've been a fool, Harry. A blind, stubborn fool who couldn't recognize what was right in front of him until the threat of losing it forever forced him to see clearly. He moved back to the window seat, sitting closer this time, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his hazel eyes. Do you know why I've never married? He asked quietly. Despite my mother's constant machinations and the parade of eligible young ladies presented to me each season, Harriet shook her head wordlessly. Because no one ever measured up to you, Albert said simply. No one was as intelligent, as genuine, as capable of challenging me and understanding me simultaneously. I told myself it was because I valued our friendship too highly to risk losing it by marrying someone you might not approve of. But the truth, I now realize, is far simpler and far more frightening. No one else could capture my heart because it already belonged to you. Harriet felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her. After years of loving him in silence, believing her feelings would never be reciprocated, to hear these words now seemed almost cruel. Why now? She whispered. Why tell me this now, when I've finally found a way to move forward with my life? Because I'm selfish, Albert admitted. Because the thought of you marrying Weatherby, of you belonging to another man, makes me physically ill. Because watching you with him these past 2 weeks has been a special kind of torture. Seeing you smile at his words, laugh at his jokes, consider spending your life with him when I've only just realized that I want that life for myself. That's not fair, Albert, Harriet said, fighting to keep her voice steady. You can't ignore me for years and then suddenly claim possession when someone else shows interest. I know, he acknowledged. I know it's not fair. I have no right to ask anything of you, Harry. No right to expect you to forgive my blindness or reciprocate feelings I've only now found the courage to admit. But I would never forgive myself if I let you marry another man without telling you the truth. I love you. Not as a sister, not as a friend, but as the woman I want by my side for the rest of my life. The sincerity in his voice, the raw emotion in his eyes, was everything Harriet had ever dreamed of seeing. And yet, doubt lingered. Was this truly love, or merely the possessive reaction of a man accustomed to having her undivided attention? How can I believe you? She asked. How can I trust that this isn't simply jealousy speaking? That once Lord Weatherby is no longer a threat, you won't revert to seeing me as just your childhood friend? Albert considered her words carefully. I can't offer proof of my feelings, Harry. I can only tell you that they've been growing and changing for years, though I was too stubborn or too blind to recognize them for what they were. But I can promise you this, whether you choose Weatherby or me or neither of us, I will never again take your presence in my life for granted. I will never again fail to see you, truly see you, as the remarkable woman you are. He reached for her hand, hesitantly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. When she didn't, he entwined his fingers with hers, the simple touch sending warmth through her entire body. I won't pressure you, he promised. Take whatever time you need to consider Lord Weatherby's offer, and mine. Whatever you decide, I will respect your choice. But please, Harry, don't make that decision based on who you think I was or what you think I felt in the past. Make it based on who we could be to each other now and in the future. A soft knock at the library door interrupted the charged moment between them. The door opened to reveal a footman, looking apologetic. Forgive the interruption, Your Grace, Lady Harriet, But Lady Caroline is asking for Lady Harriet's assistance with some correspondence. Of course, Harriet said, grateful for the reprieve. She needed time to process Albert's unexpected declaration, to separate what her heart wanted to believe from what reason cautioned her to question. As she rose to leave, Albert kept hold of her hand for a moment longer. "Think about what I've said, Harry, please." She nodded, unable to trust her voice, and slipped from the library with her thoughts in turmoil. Everything she had believed about her relationship with Albert had been upended in the span of a single conversation. After years of certainty that he would never return her feelings, she now faced the possibility that he truly did love her, and the terrifying decision of whether to trust in that love or choose the safer path with Lord Wetherby. Caroline was waiting in the morning room, a letter in her hand and a calculating expression on her face. "There you are, Harriet. I've been looking everywhere for you." "The footman said you needed assistance with correspondence," Harriet asked, struggling to compose herself after the emotional scene in the library. "A small deception, I'm afraid," Caroline admitted without a trace of remorse. "I actually wanted to speak with you privately about something rather delicate." Harriet sighed inwardly, in no mood for Caroline's manipulations. "What is it, Caroline?" "I've noticed a certain tension between you and the Duke these past days," Caroline began, circling the topic with practiced delicacy. "And now Lord Wetherby's attention to you has become quite marked. One might almost think you were at the centre of a romantic rivalry. Is there a question in there somewhere?" Harriet asked wearily. Caroline's smile tightened slightly. "Merely an observation, cousin, though I confess to some confusion. You've never shown interest in securing a husband before, yet suddenly you have not one but two gentlemen seemingly vying for your favour." "Perhaps I simply hadn't met the right gentleman before," Harriet replied evenly. "Perhaps," Caroline agreed, though her tone suggested skepticism. "Or perhaps the Duke's attentions are merely the result of wounded pride. Men do hate to lose what they consider their possessions, even if they had no interest in claiming them properly." The barb struck closer to Harriet's own doubts than Caroline could have known. Was Albert's declaration genuine, or merely a reaction to seeing her desired by another man? "The Duke doesn't consider me his possession," Harriet said firmly. "No?" Caroline raised an eyebrow. "Then why does he watch you constantly? Why does he interrupt every conversation you have with Lord Wetherby? Why has he been in such a foul mood since the viscount began calling?" "I couldn't say," Harriet replied, though her heart raced at the implications. Caroline moved closer, her voice dropping to a confidential tone. "Harriet, I say this as family who cares for your welfare. Don't mistake the Duke's possessiveness for love. He may convince himself temporarily that he has feelings for you, but a man of his position needs a certain type of wife, someone who understands the social requirements of his station, someone who can navigate the complexities of London society. Someone like you." Harriet finished the thought. Caroline had the grace to flush slightly. "I didn't say that." "You didn't need to," Harriet replied. "Your interest in Albert has been obvious from the moment you arrived." "Is it so wrong to admire a man of his qualities?" Caroline countered. "He is everything a duke should be, handsome, wealthy, well-connected. We would make a suitable match." "And you're telling me this because I don't want to see you hurt," Caroline insisted, though the sincerity of her concern was questionable. "The Duke may think he wants you now, when you're suddenly showing interest in another man, but once that novelty fades, he'll revert to type. Better to accept Lord Wetherby's offer, a man who genuinely appreciates your unique qualities." The manipulation was transparent, but it played on Harriet's deepest fears. What if Albert's feelings were merely temporary, a response to the threat of losing her rather than genuine love? "I appreciate your concern," Harriet said diplomatically, "but my relationship with Albert and with Lord Wetherby is not something I wish to discuss." Caroline studied her face for a moment, then nodded with false graciousness. "Of course, I've overstepped. Forgive me, cousin." As Harriet left the morning room, she felt more confused than ever. Between Albert's passionate declaration, Lord Wetherby's honourable offer, and Caroline's manipulative warnings, she no longer knew what or whom to trust. What she needed was time alone to think, to sort through her tangled emotions without influence from any of them. But time was the one luxury she didn't have. Lord Wetherby would expect an answer soon, and Albert Albert had upended her entire world with a few heartfelt words. Words she had longed to hear for years, but now feared might be spoken in haste, only to be regretted at leisure. As she climbed the stairs to her bedchamber, Harriet made a decision. She would write to her father, requesting permission to return home immediately. Away from Hadno House, away from Albert's intense gaze and Lord Wetherby's quiet patience, perhaps she could finally determine what her heart truly wanted. The atmosphere at Grosvenor House on the night of the midsummer ball was one of elegance and anticipation. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the ballroom, where London's elite had gathered in their finest attire to see and be seen. It was the social event of the season, made all the more exciting by rumours of unexpected romantic entanglements among the ton. Lady Harriet Manners stood at the edge of the ballroom, observing the swirl of colourful gowns and formal black evening wear with a detached interest. 3 weeks had passed since her hasty departure from Hadno House, 3 weeks of quiet reflection at her father's country estate, interrupted only by Lord Wetherby's formal call to present his suit and her father's increasing impatience for her decision. She had expected Albert to follow her, to press his case with the same intensity he had shown in the library that rainy morning. Instead, there had been only silence. No letters, no unexpected visits, nothing to suggest that his declaration had been anything more than a momentary impulse born of jealousy. The disappointment had been acute, but also clarifying. If Albert could so easily let her go after claiming to love her, then perhaps Caroline had been right. Perhaps his feelings were merely a reaction to the threat of losing her attention rather than genuine love. Lord Wetherby, by contrast, had been steadfast. His formal call on her father had been everything proper and dignified. He had spoken to Lord Manners of his admiration for Harriet's character and intelligence, detailed his financial situation and the provisions he would make for her comfort, and requested permission to address her directly. When granted a private audience with Harriet, he had reiterated his offer without pressure, assuring her that he respected her need for time to consider such an important decision. "You seem deep in thought, Lady Harriet." The voice beside her belonged to Lady Georgiana, who had arrived in London the previous day, and immediately sought out her friend. "Merely observing the pageantry," Harriet replied with a small smile. "You know how I find these events." "Tedious affairs where appearance trumps substance," Georgiana suggested wryly. "And yet here you are, looking more fashionable than I've ever seen you." Harriet glanced down at her gown, a creation of deep blue silk with silver embroidery that her father had commissioned from London's finest modiste as a tacit endorsement of Lord Wetherby's suit. The cut was more daring than her usual conservative choices, with a lower neckline and shorter sleeves that displayed her slender arms to advantage. "Father insisted," she explained. "He believes I should make more effort now that you're considering Lord Wetherby's proposal," Georgiana finished. "Have you reached a decision?" Harriet sighed. "I'm expected to give my answer tomorrow. Father has made it clear he considers it an excellent match." "But," Georgiana prompted, knowing her friend too well to miss the hesitation in her voice. "But I don't love him," Harriet admitted quietly. "I respect him immensely, and I believe we could build a satisfactory life together, but he's not Albert," Georgiana stated simply. Harriet's eyes widened in surprise. "How did you—" "My dear Harry, I've watched you pine for that man for years," Georgiana said gently. "Did you think I wouldn't notice? The question is, does he return your feelings?" "I thought perhaps he did," Harriet replied, the memory of Albert's passionate declaration still vivid in her mind. "He said as much at Hadno House, just before I left. But his actions, or rather his lack of action since then, suggest otherwise." "Men can be remarkably dense creatures," Georgiana observed. "Perhaps he's giving you space to consider your options without pressure. Or perhaps he regretted his words as soon as they were spoken," Harriet countered. "Either way, I cannot base my future on what might have been. Lord Wetherby offers security, respect, and kindness. That is more than many women find in marriage." "Security, respect, and kindness are excellent foundations," Georgiana agreed. "But love, Harry, true love is a gift too precious to discard if it's within your grasp." Before Harriet could respond, a murmur rippled through the ballroom, heads turning toward the entrance. Harriet followed the collective gaze and felt her heart stutter in her chest. Albert had arrived. He stood in the doorway, tall and imposing in formal evening attire, his chestnut hair slightly tousled as always, his hazel eyes scanning the room with purpose. He nodded acknowledgement to acquaintances, but continued his survey until his gaze locked with Harriet's across the crowded ballroom. For a moment, the cacophony of music and conversation seemed to fade, leaving only the visual connection between them. Then Albert began moving through the crowd with determined strides, ignoring those who attempted to engage him in conversation. "Well," Georgiana murmured, "I believe your Duke has made his decision, whatever yours might be." "He's not my Duke," Harriet whispered, though her racing pulse suggested otherwise. Within moments, Albert stood before them, bowing formally. "Lady Georgiana, Lady Harriet." "Your Grace," they curtsied in unison. "Lady Georgiana, might I impose upon you to excuse us?" Albert asked, his tone polite but brooking no argument. "I have a matter of some urgency to discuss with Lady Harriet." Georgiana smiled knowingly. "Of course, Your Grace. I believe Lady Hartley was just looking for me." She squeezed Harriet's hand reassuringly before disappearing into the crowd. "You left without saying goodbye," Albert said without preamble once they were relatively alone. "I left a note," Harriet countered. "Family matters require my immediate return home," Albert quoted from memory. "Hardly an adequate explanation after our conversation." "What would you have had me say?" Harriet asked, struggling to maintain her composure. "That I needed time away from you to think clearly. That I was afraid your declaration was merely a reaction to Lord Weatherby's interest rather than genuine feeling." "I would have preferred the truth," Albert replied. "However uncomfortable." "The truth," Harriet repeated softly. "The truth is that I've loved you for years, Albert. Years of watching you court other women, years of being your trusted friend, while dying inside each time you treated me as a sister rather than a woman. Then suddenly, the moment another man shows interest, you claim to have feelings for me. How was I to trust that?" Albert's expression softened. "You're right to doubt me. I gave you no reason to believe my feelings were genuine or lasting. Which is why I didn't follow you immediately, why I've given you these weeks to consider Lord Weatherby's offer without interference." "How magnanimous!" Harriet couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. "Not magnanimous," Albert corrected. "Terrified. Terrified that in my selfishness and blindness I'd missed my chance with the one woman who has always seen me clearly, who has challenged me and supported me in equal measure. Terrified that you might choose a good man who recognized your worth long before I had the sense to acknowledge my own feelings." The vulnerability in his voice caught Harriet off guard. Albert had always projected confidence, even arrogance at times. To hear him admit fear, to see uncertainty in his eyes, was so unexpected that she found herself momentarily speechless. "Why are you here tonight?" she finally asked. "Because I couldn't stay away any longer," he admitted. "Because tomorrow you give Lord Weatherby your answer, and I had to see you one last time before you made your decision." Harriet's eyes widened. "How did you know about tomorrow?" "Weatherby told me himself," Albert said. "We met at Brooks's 3 days ago. He was surprisingly forthright about his intentions regarding you." "You spoke with Lord Weatherby about me?" Harriet was genuinely shocked now. "What possible reason could you have had for such a conversation?" A muscle ticked in Albert's jaw. "I needed to understand what kind of man was offering for you, whether he truly appreciated your worth or merely saw a convenient match with a respectable family." "And did he pass your examination?" Harriet asked, not sure whether to be amused or outraged by Albert's presumption. "With distinction," Albert admitted grudgingly. "He spoke of you with genuine admiration and respect. He understands your intelligence, your principles, your spirit. He would, I believe, make you a good husband." The admission clearly cost him, but the honesty of it touched something in Harriet's heart. "Then why are you here?" she asked again, more gently this time. "Because a good husband isn't the same as the right husband," Albert said quietly. "Because I believe, I hope, that despite my many failings, I could make you happier than Weatherby ever could." Before Harriet could respond, the orchestra struck up a waltz. Albert held out his hand, a question in his eyes. "Dance with me? One last time, if your choice is already made, or perhaps the first time with new understanding between us." She placed her hand in his, allowing him to lead her onto the dance floor. As his arm circled her waist and they began to move in perfect synchronization, Harriet was acutely aware of the eyes upon them, curious glances from matrons, speculative whispers behind fans, Caroline's barely concealed fury from the opposite side of the ballroom. "People are watching," she murmured. "Let them," Albert replied, his gaze never leaving her face. "I want everyone to see us together. I want the entire town to know that the Duke of Keswick is utterly captivated by Lady Harriet Manners." The boldness of the statement, the public acknowledgement of his regard, sent a thrill through her. This was not the cautious, private Albert she had known. This was a man making a declaration to all of society. "What changed?" she asked as they turned gracefully around the floor. "Between Hadner House and now?" "Nothing changed," Albert said. "I merely found the courage to acknowledge what has been true for years, that you are the most important person in my life, that the thought of losing you to another man is unbearable, that I love you not as a friend or sister, but as the woman I want beside me for the rest of my days." The words were everything Harriet had longed to hear, yet still she hesitated. "How can I trust this isn't merely the fear of losing a comfortable relationship? That once I'm securely yours, you won't revert to seeing me as just your childhood friend?" "Because I never saw you as just my childhood friend," Albert said with quiet intensity. "I saw you as essential, as the person who understood me better than anyone, who challenged me to be better, who never treated me differently because of my title or wealth. I was too blind or too cowardly to recognize those feelings as love, but they were always there, Harry." The music swelled around them, but Harriet barely heard it, too focused on the sincerity in Albert's eyes, the warmth of his hand against her waist, the rightness of being in his arms. "When did you know?" she asked. "When did you realize your feelings went beyond friendship?" "There wasn't a single moment of revelation," Albert admitted. "Rather, a series of realizations. I found myself comparing every woman I met to you, and finding them all wanting. I noticed how my mood lifted whenever you entered a room, how I sought your opinion on every matter of importance, how I felt most myself in your company." He guided her through a turn, his movements sure and graceful. "But if I'm honest, I think I began to understand my true feelings years ago, at your first season. You wore a gown of pale green silk, and every eligible bachelor in London was vying for your attention. I was consumed with jealousy, but told myself it was merely protective instinct for an old friend." "I remember that night," Harriet said softly. "You hardly spoke to me, and when you did, it was to criticize my dancing partners. Because I couldn't bear to see you smiling at them," Albert acknowledged ruefully. "I was an idiot, Harry. A blind, selfish idiot who nearly lost the most precious thing in his life because he was too afraid to examine his own heart." As the music drew to a close, Albert did not immediately release her, keeping her hand in his as he led her toward the terrace doors. "Walk with me? It's too crowded in here for the conversation we need to have." Harriet nodded, following him onto the moonlit terrace, where a few other couples sought momentary respite from the heat and noise of the ballroom. Albert guided her to a secluded corner, partially screened by potted orange trees, offering a modicum of privacy while remaining within sight of the ballroom, preserving her reputation. "I won't pressure you," Albert said once they were relatively alone. "If you've already decided to accept Weatherby, I will respect your choice however much it pains me. But before you give him your answer, I ask only that you consider what I'm offering instead." "And what exactly are you offering, Albert?" Harriet asked, needing absolute clarity after years of misunderstanding. "Everything," he said simply. "My heart, my name, my life. I'm asking you to be my wife, Harry. To be the Duchess of Keswick, yes, but more importantly, to be my partner in all things. The one who challenges me when I'm wrong, supports me when I'm right, and loves me despite my many flaws." Harriet's breath caught in her throat. Despite his earlier declarations, she hadn't fully expected a proposal. Not here, not now, not with such direct simplicity. "This isn't like you," she observed. "Grand public gestures, emotional declarations. You've always been more reserved, more private." "Because I've never had something this important to fight for," Albert replied. "I nearly lost you through my own blindness and complacency. I won't make that mistake again." He took her hands in his gaze intense and unwavering. "I love you, Harriet Manners. I have loved you for years, though I was too stubborn to recognize it. And if you'll have me, I will spend the rest of my life ensuring you never doubt that love again." The sincerity in his voice, the vulnerability in his eyes, broke through the last of Harriet's defenses. This was not the casual, assured Albert she had known for years, but a man laying his heart bare, risking rejection and humiliation for the chance to win her love. "What of society's expectations?" she asked, one final test. "A duke typically marries for advantage, political connections, wealth, strategic alliances." "Hang society's expectations," Albert said firmly. "I have wealth enough for both of us. What I need is a wife with a sharp mind and a kind heart. Someone who sees the man beneath the title and holds him accountable. I need you, Harry. I've always needed you." It was, at last, enough. The doubt that had plagued her since his first declaration at Hadnor House dissolved, replaced by certainty. Whatever complications might lie ahead, whatever challenges they might face as Duke and Duchess, they would face them together, as equal partners, bound by love rather than mere duty or convenience. "Yes," she said simply. Albert blinked, as if not quite comprehending. "Yes?" A smile blossomed on Harriet's face, radiant with joy long suppressed. "Yes, I will marry you, Albert Hadnor. Though heavens help you, I'm told I'm quite opinionated and decidedly unfeminine in my interests." Albert laughed, the sound rich with relief and happiness. "Thank goodness for that. I would be lost with a conventional duchess." Without warning, he drew her into his arms and kissed her. A kiss that began with gentle reverence but quickly deepened into something more passionate, as years of unspoken longing found expression at last. Harriet responded with equal fervor, her hands clutching his lapels, her heart soaring with the knowledge that this was real, that Albert truly loved her as she had always loved him. When they finally parted, breathless and flushed, Albert rested his forehead against hers. "I should have done that years ago," he murmured. "Yes, you should have," Harriet agreed with a smile. "But perhaps we needed the time apart to truly appreciate what we mean to each other. Speaking of which," Albert said, suddenly sobering, "there's still the matter of Lord Wetherby. He deserves an answer, and I won't have him humiliated publicly." Harriet nodded, touched by Albert's consideration for a man who had, after all, been his rival. "I'll write to him tonight, explaining my decision. He's a good man, Albert. He deserves honesty and respect." "He is," Albert agreed, "which is why I'm certain he'll understand. He told me himself that he wanted you to be sure of your choice, that he had no desire to be any woman's second choice." A small frown creased Harriet's brow. "You seem to have had quite the conversation with him." "We understand each other," Albert said simply. Two men who recognize the exceptional worth of the same woman. Before they could continue their conversation, the terrace doors opened and Caroline emerged, her expression a mixture of surprise and calculation when she spotted them together in the shadowed corner. "Cousin, Your Grace," she called, approaching with measured steps. "How fortunate to find you both. Lord Wetherby has just arrived and is asking after you, Harriet." Albert tensed beside her, but Harriet placed a calming hand on his arm. "Thank you, Caroline. Please tell Lord Wetherby I'll speak with him shortly." Caroline's gaze flicked to their joined hands, and her smile tightened imperceptibly. "Of course. Though he seemed quite eager for your company. Something about an important matter to discuss before tomorrow." "I'm sure it can wait a few more minutes," Albert said evenly. "Lady Harriet and I have matters of our own to conclude." Understanding dawned in Caroline's eyes. Understanding and a flash of genuine dismay quickly masked by social politeness. "I see. Well, I wouldn't dream of interrupting. I'll inform Lord Wetherby that you're otherwise engaged." As she turned to leave, Harriet called after her, "Caroline?" The blonde paused, glancing back with a carefully neutral expression. "Thank you," Harriet said sincerely, "for helping me see what I truly wanted, even if that wasn't your intention." A complicated emotion flickered across Caroline's face. Disappointment, resignation, and perhaps a grudging respect. With a slight nod, she returned to the ballroom, leaving Albert and Harriet alone once more. "That was generous of you," Albert observed. "She did try to manipulate both of us." "She did," Harriet agreed. "But in doing so, she forced me to examine my own heart more honestly than I might have otherwise. Sometimes our adversaries give us gifts without intending to." Albert shook his head in wonder. "This is why I love you, Harry. You see the best in people, even those who don't deserve it." "Not always," Harriet admitted. "But I'm learning. Now, shall we go speak with Lord Wetherby? I'd rather explain my decision to him directly than have him hear it as gossip." Albert nodded, offering his arm with formal courtesy that was belied by the warmth in his eyes. "Together, then." As they returned to the ballroom, Harriet felt a profound sense of rightness settle over her. The path ahead would not be without challenges. There would be raised eyebrows at their match, adjustments as she stepped into the role of Duchess, the inevitable complications of merging two lives long lived separately. But with Albert beside her, those challenges seemed surmountable, even welcome, as part of the journey they would share. Lord Wetherby stood near the refreshment table, his expression brightening when he saw Harriet approach. The smile faltered slightly as he noted Albert beside her, their posture and expressions clearly indicating a significant shift in their relationship. "Lady Harriet," he bowed. "Your Grace." "Lord Wetherby," Harriet curtsied. "I believe we need to speak privately, if you would be so kind as to accompany me to the card-room. It's likely to be less crowded at this hour." Albert released her arm with a reassuring squeeze, understanding that this conversation was hers alone to conduct. "I'll await you by the main entrance," he said softly, before nodding respectfully to Lord Wetherby and withdrawing. The card-room was indeed nearly deserted, with just two elderly gentlemen engaged in a game of whist in the far corner. Harriet led Lord Wetherby to a quiet alcove near the window, gathering her courage to deliver news that would disappoint a man she genuinely respected. "I believe I can anticipate what you're about to say," Lord Wetherby said gently before she could speak. "Your feelings for the Duke were evident even at Hadnor House, though you seemed determined to ignore them at the time." Harriet flushed slightly. "Was I so transparent?" "Only to someone looking closely," he assured her. "And I was looking closely, as a man considering a life partnership tends to do. The way your eyes followed him, the tension between you, it spoke of deeper feelings than mere friendship." "I never meant to mislead you," Harriet said earnestly. "When you made your offer, I genuinely believed a marriage based on mutual respect and shared values might be possible, even without romantic love. And it might have been," Lord Wetherby acknowledged, "had your heart truly been free. But it never was it?" Harriet shook her head, unable to deny the truth. "No, though I tried to convince myself otherwise." "Then I'm glad you didn't accept my offer under false pretenses," he said with quiet dignity. "A marriage should be built on honesty above all else. I wish you and the Duke every happiness, Lady Harriet. He's a fortunate man to have won your heart." "And some woman will be fortunate to win yours," Harriet replied sincerely. "You deserve nothing less than complete love and devotion, my lord." Lord Wetherby smiled, a touch of sadness in his eyes, but no bitterness. "Perhaps. For now, I return to Yorkshire and my daughter, content in the knowledge that I conducted myself honourably in this matter, if unsuccessfully." "More than honourably," Harriet assured him, "with a dignity and kindness I shall not forget." With a final bow, Lord Wetherby took his leave, his tall figure straight and proud as he exited the card-room. Harriet watched him go with a mixture of regret and relief. Regret for any pain she might have caused him. Relief that their parting had been marked by mutual respect rather than recrimination. When she rejoined Albert in the entrance hall, his questioning look was answered by her gentle smile. "It's done," she said simply. "He understood, as you said he would." "He's a good man," Albert acknowledged. "Under different circumstances I might have called him friend." "Perhaps someday you will," Harriet suggested. "Time has a way of healing awkward beginnings." Albert laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "Always the optimist, Harry." "Not always," she corrected him. "But tonight—" "Yes, tonight I find optimism comes quite easily." They departed the ball shortly thereafter. Scandal be damned. Albert handed Harriet into his carriage with elaborate care, his touch lingering on her gloved hand. As the carriage began its journey through London's lamp-lit streets, he reached for her hand again, entwining their fingers with casual intimacy. "What are you thinking?" he asked, studying her face in the dim light. "I'm thinking how strange life is," Harriet replied honestly. "A month ago I had resigned myself to a marriage of convenience with Lord Wetherby, convinced you would never see me as more than a sister. Now here I am, engaged to the man I've loved since girlhood, heading toward a future I never dared hope for." "Not engaged yet, technically," Albert pointed out with a smile. "I haven't formally asked your father for your hand." "A formality only," Harriet waved dismissively. "Father will be delighted. He's always been fond of you, and the prospect of his daughter becoming a duchess will more than compensate for any disappointment regarding Lord Wetherby." "Still," Albert insisted, "we'll do things properly. I'll call on your father tomorrow, make my intentions clear, ensure all the appropriate settlements are arranged." "So dutiful," Harriet teased. "I'm surprised you didn't insist on speaking to him before declaring yourself to me." Albert's expression turned serious. "Because this isn't about duty, Harry. This is about love. My love for you, which exists independently of titles or expectations or proprieties. I wanted you to know that I was choosing you, Harriet Manners, not merely fulfilling an obligation to my lineage or position." The sincerity in his voice touched her deeply. This was the Albert she had always known existed beneath the formal ducal exterior, passionate, sincere, capable of great depth of feeling when he allowed himself to express it. "I love you," she said simply, the words feeling both new and familiar on her tongue. Not the Duke of Keswick, but Albert Hadner, the boy who taught me to climb trees, the young man who debated philosophy with me for hours, the man who finally saw me clearly after all these years. Albert raised their joined hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles with reverent tenderness. "And I love you, Harry. Always have, even when I was too blind to recognize it. Always will until my last breath." As the carriage continued its journey through the sleeping city, Harriet leaned against Albert's shoulder, content in the knowledge that their story, a story of friendship transformed into love, of blindness giving way to sight, of patience finally rewarded, was only just beginning. And somewhere in Yorkshire, Lord Wetherby was returning to his daughter, disappointed but not broken, still open to the possibility of finding love again. Caroline was adjusting her expectations and setting her sights on new prospects, her practical nature already calculating alternative paths to advantage. The Dowager Duchess was likely planning a wedding of unprecedented splendor, delighted that her son had finally chosen a bride, and one she had always considered a daughter of her heart. All paths had led to this moment, this quiet intimacy in a carriage rolling through London's darkened streets, where two people who had known each other their entire lives were discovering each other anew, not as childhood friends or casual acquaintances, but as partners equals lovers. The Duke had said, "You're like a sister," until he saw her with another man and couldn't breathe. But in truth, he had never seen her as merely a sister. He had seen her as essential, as vital to his existence as heir, as the other half of himself he hadn't known was missing, until the threat of losing her forever forced him to acknowledge the depth of his feelings. And Harriet, who had loved him silently for years, found that love freely given was infinitely sweeter than love painfully withheld. The journey had been long and often painful, but as Albert's arm tightened around her shoulders and his lips brushed her temple in a gesture of tender possession, she knew with absolute certainty that every moment of waiting, every tear shed in private, had been worth it for this. The joy of being truly seen, truly known, truly loved by the one person whose opinion had always mattered most. It was not the ending she had expected when she arrived at Hadner House 3 weeks earlier. It was something far better, not an ending at all, but a beginning. The beginning of a life shared, a love declared, and a future faced together, hand in hand, heart to heart. The end. Dear listener, there is a quiet magic in the evening hours when the world softens. Perhaps you're sitting in your favorite chair now, the day's demands finally at rest. In these moments, stories like Harriet and Albert's reach us not as mere entertainment, but as gentle messengers from across time. What struck me most about their journey wasn't the misunderstanding or even the eventual reunion. It was the enduring flame that refused to extinguish despite years of silence. Some fires aren't meant to die. They simply wait for the right moment to illuminate our paths. You who have journeyed through decades understand something that youth cannot. Genuine connection transcends time. The heart doesn't wear out like knees or eyesight. Its capacity for tenderness and wonder remains evergreen, sometimes growing stronger with each passing season. Society tries to convince us that certain chapters close permanently after a certain age, that passion, discovery, and revelation belong exclusively to youth. What magnificent nonsense! The most profound awakenings often arrive precisely when we have the wisdom to truly appreciate them. Think of the gardens you've tended throughout your life. Relationships nurtured, dreams planted, lessons harvested. Some seeds take decades to fully bloom. Some relationships reveal their deepest treasures only after the patina of years has polished them to their true luster. You've lived long enough to recognize the circular nature of existence, how endings often cradle new beginnings in their arms, how what seems lost sometimes isn't lost at all, but merely waiting in the wings for its perfect moment of return. The connections that matter most, whether with others or with forgotten parts of yourself, have a remarkable way of finding their way back to you, often more beautiful for the journey they've taken. Like Harriet, you may discover that what you thought was forever beyond reach was merely gathering strength for its return. Like Albert, you may yet see with fresh eyes what has been patiently waiting for your recognition. Rest peacefully in the knowledge that time is not a thief, but a revealer of treasures. Let your dreams be gentle, your sleep restorative, and your awakening tomorrow filled with the quiet certainty that grace still awaits you, around unexpected corners, in chance encounters, or perhaps in rediscovering something wonderful you thought was lost. You are held in the embrace of a universe that knows no deadlines for joy, no expiration dates for wonder. With all our gratitude, the Legends of the Fall team. Thank you so much for staying with us until the very end. We sincerely hope that Harriet and Albert's journey has touched your heart as deeply as it touched ours. If this story moved you in any way, we kindly invite you to support our channel. Please like the video, leave a comment to share your thoughts, subscribe so you never miss a new tale, and share it with someone who loves timeless stories of love and redemption. Your continued support inspires us to keep creating heartfelt stories filled with love, second chances, and breathtaking emotional twists. At the end of this video, you'll find a suggestion for another story from our channel. Click and continue the journey with us. Thank you for being here. The Legends of the Fall team.